The crystal glasses clinked against the marble dining table as my mother set down another bottle of champagne. The Morrison family's annual achievement dinner was in full swing, though I hardly felt like celebrating. My sister Victoria sat at the head of the table, practically glowing in her designer dress as she detailed her latest promotion. And just like that, I became the youngest VP in Marshall & Sons history, she'd announced, earning appreciative murmurs from our assembled family members. The CEO said my restructuring plan was brilliant. I took another sip of water, trying to blend into the expensive wallpaper of my parents' dining room. These dinners had become a tradition over the past 5 years, a chance for everyone to brag about their accomplishments while subtly undermining anyone who didn't meet the family's elite standards. Elizabeth, my Aunt Patricia's sharp voice cut through my thoughts. Still doing that consulting work. All eyes turned to me, and I could feel the judgment radiating from each carefully maintained expression. At 32, I was the family disappointment, the one who'd walked away from a prestigious position at Goldman Sachs to start my own consulting firm. Yes, I replied simply, but before I could elaborate, Victoria let out a dramatic sigh. Poor Elizabeth, still a nobody after all these years, she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. You know, we have some entry-level positions opening up at Marshall & Sons. I could put in a good word. She's just a consultant, my mother added with a heavy sigh, refilling Victoria's glass while pointedly ignoring mine. We had such high hopes. I felt my jaw tighten, but kept my expression neutral. If they only knew that just a consultant was a carefully crafted facade. None of them had any idea that over the past 5 years, I'd built Shadow Peak Consulting into one of the most powerful firms in the industry, operating through a complex network of shell companies and subsidiaries. Well, not everyone can be as successful as Victoria, my father chimed in, beaming at my sister. She's about to close the biggest acquisition in Marshall & Sons history. The merger with Global Dynamics will transform the entire company. Victoria preened under the praise, but I had to suppress a smile. The Global Dynamics merger, if only they knew the truth about who really controlled that deal. Actually, I said carefully, I have some news of my own. Oh darling, my mother interrupted, perhaps save the small updates for another time. Victoria was just about to tell us about her new penthouse. I fell silent, watching as my sister launched into a detailed description of her luxury apartment's view. Let them have tonight, I thought. Tomorrow would change everything. Later that evening, as I drove back to my modest apartment, the one my family assumed was all I could afford, my phone buzzed with an urgent message from Marcus, my chief operations officer. Everything's set for tomorrow. The Marshall & Sons board has signed off on all terms. They have no idea what's coming. I smiled, thinking of the carefully orchestrated plan that would unfold in less than 12 hours. For 5 years, I'd operated in the shadows, building an empire while my family dismissed me as a failure. Shadow Peak Consulting wasn't just another firm, it was a powerhouse that had systematically acquired controlling interests in key companies across multiple industries. And tomorrow, Marshall & Sons would discover that their precious merger with Global Dynamics came with an unexpected twist. The company they thought they were acquiring was actually one of my shell corporations. The terms they'd so eagerly signed would give Shadow Peak Consulting complete control over Marshall & Sons. Victoria's career-making deal was about to become her biggest humiliation. I parked my car and took the elevator to my apartment, not the real one in the penthouse of the city's most exclusive building, but the modest space I maintained for family visits. Inside, I opened my safe and pulled out the final documents for tomorrow's reveal. The morning would bring the kind of dramatic revelation my family seemed to love so much. Only this time, the shock would be on them. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Marcus. Your name is already being added to the building. By sunrise, everyone will know who really runs Marshall & Sons. I poured myself a glass of wine, not the cheap variety my family assumed I drank, but a vintage worth more than Victoria's monthly salary. Tomorrow would mark the end of Elizabeth the nobody, the family disappointment, the just a consultant. Tomorrow they'd learn exactly who I'd become, while they were too busy looking down their noses to notice my rise. The next morning, I stood in my real office, the entire top floor of the Shadow Peak building downtown. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of the city skyline, including the Marshall & Sons headquarters where my name was being installed in gleaming letters. Miss Hamilton, my assistant Sarah appeared at my door. They're waiting in the main conference room. Your sister is quite vocal about the delay. I smiled, adjusting my tailored Armani suit, a far cry from the intentionally modest clothes I wore to family functions. How long have they been waiting? 20 minutes. Your father has mentioned his importance approximately 7 times. Perfect. I picked up my tablet and started toward the conference room. And the name change on the building? Just completed. It's visible from the conference room windows. I paused outside the heavy oak doors, hearing Victoria's sharp voice cutting through them. This is ridiculous. Do they have any idea who we are? When I meet this mysterious CEO of Shadow Peak, I pushed open the doors. The conversation died instantly. Victoria, mid-rant, froze with her mouth open. My father dropped his coffee cup, dark liquid spreading across the pristine white tablecloth. My mother's perfectly maintained facade cracked as her face went pale. Elizabeth? Victoria finally managed. What are you doing here? This is a private meeting for senior executives. I walked calmly to the head of the table, setting down my tablet. Good morning, everyone. I apologize for the delay. Shall we discuss the terms of Shadow Peak's acquisition of Marshall & Sons? Acquisition? My father stood up, his face reddening. What nonsense is this? We're here to finalize our merger with Global Dynamics. Where's Shadow Peak's CEO? I sat down, smoothing my skirt. You're looking at her. The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria's designer heel clicked against the floor as she took an unconscious step backward. This is impossible, she whispered. You're just a small-time consultant. You work out of that tiny office downtown. That office. I smiled. It's one of our meeting spaces for local clients. Shadow Peak Consulting operates in 37 countries, Victoria. We own this building. I gestured to the window. And as of today, we own Marshall & Sons. My mother found her voice. But Global Dynamics is a subsidiary of Shadow Peak. I finished for her. Just like the investment firm that's been buying up Marshall & Sons shares for the past 3 years. Shares that give us controlling interest as of this morning. Victoria sank into her chair, her face ashen. The merger terms are non-negotiable. I pulled up the final contract on the room's main screen. Shadow Peak will assume control of all operations. We'll be restructuring the management team, starting with the immediate termination of the current vice president of operations. Victoria's head snapped up. You can't fire me. I'm your sister. Exactly why I should have noticed your incompetence sooner. I turned to my father. The board has already approved the terms. They did so last night after reviewing the company's complete financial position, including the creative accounting that's been hiding Marshall & Sons' real debt. My father slumped in his chair, decades of authority draining from his face. Why, Elizabeth? Why go to all this trouble? I stood up slowly, walking to the window where my name now crowned the Marshall & Sons building. 5 years ago, when I left Goldman Sachs, you told me I was throwing my life away, that I'd never amount to anything without the family name to prop me up. I turned back to face them. So I built something better. Something bigger. While you were all laughing at my little consulting business, I was creating an empire. Sarah entered silently, distributing folders to everyone at the table. These documents outline the transition. I continued. Victoria, your security clearance has already been revoked. Human Resources will escort you out after this meeting. Mom, Victoria pleaded, turning to her mother who sat frozen in her chair. Do something. But there was nothing she could do, nothing any of them could do. Last night at dinner, I said, my voice cutting through Victoria's rising panic, you called me a nobody. You've spent years mocking my career choices, belittling my achievements, assuming my silence meant weakness. I walked to the door, then turned back one final time. I want you to remember this moment. Remember that the sister you dismissed, the daughter you devalued, now owns everything you spent your lives bragging about. The next hour passed in a blur of signatures and legal requirements. Victoria was escorted out by security, mascara streaming down her face. My father avoided my eyes as he surrendered his company keys. My mother, for once, had nothing to say. Later that evening, I stood in my office, watching the sun set behind the city skyline. Sarah appeared with a glass of champagne, the same expensive brand my family had been drinking last night while mocking my supposed failures. Was it worth it? She asked quietly. All these years of hiding your success. I thought about the decades of condescension, the dismissive comments, the patronizing offers of entry-level positions. Then I thought about the empire I built, the thousands of employees who relied on me, the positive changes I could now implement at Marshall and Sons. It wasn't about revenge, I said finally. It was about proving that success doesn't always look the way they think it should, that you don't have to follow their path to build something meaningful. I raised my glass to the gleaming letters that now crowned the building. Elizabeth Hamilton, CEO. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the most powerful. Sometimes the child they underestimate becomes the giant they must answer to. And sometimes the sweetest victory isn't in proving them wrong. It's in showing them that you never needed their approval in the first place. The following year brought changes no one in my family could have predicted. Marshall and Sons, under Shadow Peak's leadership, transformed into a more ethical, innovative company. Victoria eventually found a mid-level position at another firm, hopefully having learned the value of humility. My parents, their social standing shattered, stopped hosting their achievement dinners. And me, I kept building, growing, expanding, not to prove anything to them anymore, but because I discovered something they never understood. True success isn't about titles or family names or yearly bonuses. It's about creating something meaningful, something that lasts. These days, when people ask about my path to success, I tell them the truth. Sometimes the best response to those who underestimate you isn't to prove them wrong immediately. It's to build something so magnificent that when they finally realize their mistake, it's already too late